You guys, which one of you is going first?
Bruce is going to
I'm-
start. Go ahead, and we'll just jump in back and forth. And if
Yeah, I'm Bruce Lloyd from Lewis County, and Brad and I are going to do this together. And on any given slide, either one of us might jump in and add things or whatever. And if anybody out there listening has things that you have questions about or things that you want to add, you're welcome to jump in as well. To start out with, the one thing about managing the forages in a drought is that if you haven't done things in preparation for this, you're pretty limited on what you can do. There are some things you can do, but it has a lot of limitations too. So Alex or Brad, whoever has, go on the next slide. Can I click on that here?
I don't know.
Oh.
Try.
I don't think so. Okay. So some of the first steps, and I'll also say this, it depends on where you are, not just where you are in the state, but what your situation is, because even within counties, we know that situations can be way different depending on localized rain or lack of rain or all these kind of things, and depending on where your situation is with your herd. So everybody's situation is going to be somewhat different, but here are some steps you could take. And the first one would be to conserve as much forage as you have, if you still have forage left. Grass, I'm talking about pasture. And so if you follow these steps here on this slide, then you can significantly reduce your forage needs and maybe push your pasture a little farther. So the first would be to wean your calves. If you're a cow-calf operation, wean the calves. And ideally, if you're in a marketing pool or something like that, you're going to be doing that anyway. So wean them early. By early September, may not be early for most pools that are doing that anyway, but get them on some feed for good gain, and then sell them when they're ready. Or you maybe it's just a matter of just taking those calves right off the cows and sell them directly. But getting those calves, we're talking about, of course, winter-born calves or late spring-born calves. Getting those calves off those cows is going to make a significant difference in two things. Number one is what the calf is eating off the ground, the pasture it's eating, and two, the cow's nutrient requirements are going to drop significantly once she dries off and is no longer milking. And so you can carry a dry cow a lot easier than you can carry a milking cow. And, sorry, Jerry. Okay, I thought he was going to say something. And the other thing to throw in there is this would be a good time. This is something you may do anyway, but later in the year, but do it now. Go through your cow herd and maybe take the bottom end off. That would be some older cows, possibly maybe lower quality cows. And I think in the program next week, Jerry's going to talk about some details on how you might select which cows to call. But you might call a little heavier than usual to try and get that herd down to some cows that you really want to keep. And again, that's going to significantly reduce your forage needs. So go ahead, Alex. So the other thing is to think about this thing in terms of what you're doing and how this is going to impact you, not just today and tomorrow and feeding the cows this week and next week, but how is this going to impact you next month and 6 months from now and next year? Because these decisions you make about how you manage your pasture now will affect you down the line. And so think about the long-term impact of these decisions. And again, if you've already done some of these things that I'm suggesting you don't do, then that's okay. It's too late. But here's some things, if you haven't done these things, that might help you. Number one is not overgraze your pastures. And you think, well, how could you possibly do that whenever you don't have any grass growing? And the problem you get into is if you overgraze your pastures and do the third thing there, which is open all the gates and give free access to pastures, figuring with the logic that just let them find that there's grass out there somewhere here and there, they can find it, and at least they can sustain it for a while. When it rains, I shouldn't say if, when it rains, and it's going to rain again sometime, when it rains, then your grass is not going to respond to that rain very quickly. And as late as we are in the year already, you are pretty much destined to not have any grass this fall, or very little. because it's going to respond very slowly because there's no leaf area there to collect sunlight to cause that growth. And so the temptation is to go, if you're rotating, to rotate through all your pastures and just keep going through them until everything's down to nothing. But if you have some residual out there on those pastures, when we get some rain, you will get some response to that, and it will be much quicker than if you've eaten everything down to nothing. And so if you are down to where you're like, well, the only way I can do this is to eat it down to nothing, then our suggestion would be to pick an area, a field, maybe one of your pastures that's lower in fertility even. This would be a good time to move some fertility around and confine the cattle to that area. And when I say confine, I don't mean a small lot, but confine them to a pasture and feed some hay and wait for rain. And so, I know some people have a problem with water in the right places. And I've talked to numerous people in the last several weeks that they just say, well, I have grass here, but I don't have water there, and so on. There's lots of stories like that. And so obviously, if you do go with this last point here, you're going to have to find one that has water, or it'd be ideally so you don't have to haul water. So that would be the suggestion on pasture management, is to try and maintain some leaf area on some of your pastures. So go ahead and go to the next one, Alex. So when you look at what we're going into,
You're muted. Go ahead.
we're going into fall here, and normally we would be stockpiling some grass right now for fall and winter grazing, and that's going to be hard to do, if impossible, this year. And so now is the time to inventory what you have and what you're going to have to feed. So how much hay do you have, or other feeds? What is your livestock inventory? And when do you expect to turn out next spring? So when do you have to start feeding this fall? Maybe that's right now, I don't know. Maybe it's still a month away. And then when do you expect to turn out in the spring? And just do the math. So it takes, you can figure 2.5% to 3% of body weight dry matter needs per day for doesn't matter whether we're talking about sheep or cattle. 2.5% to 3% dry matter per day. And so an animal unit's 1,000 pounds. So if you just figure 1,000 pounds of animal units and do the math, you can figure out pretty quick what your dry matter needs are. Now remember, that's dry matter. So if you have wrapped hay, then it has moisture in it. If you have silage, you of course have moisture in that. If you have dry hay, it still has some moisture, maybe 8, 9, 10%. And so but you need to do the math. So after you've done that math, then you need to decide, okay, where am I? What are my needs? Do I need to sell more livestock, buy some hay, or buy some supplements to reduce the hay consumption and reduce the hay needs? So go to the next one, Alex. So here's just an example of some of that math that you might look at. So let's say we have 40 cows. They weigh 1,400 pounds each. And we have a couple of bulls. One's a little bit younger, 1,500 pounds, and the other one's 1,900 pounds. So if we do that math and just put that 40 times 1,400, we get 56,000. And we add in the bull weight, we have 59,400 pounds of cattle. And if we divide that by 1,000, we have 59.4 animal units. And so how much does an animal unit need in a day in dry matter? They need 30 pounds, or 3% of that 1,000 pounds. So that's 1,700 pounds of dry matter needed per day. And if we multiply that by 30 days, then that tells us how many pounds of dry matter we need per month. And so for these 40 cows and those 2 bulls, we need, and I haven't taken any calves into account here. If you have calves still in the cows, then clearly you're going to have to add those in. So I think you can see pretty quick why weaning those calves can be a big help. But we need 53,000 pounds, or over 26 tons of dry matter per month. So that's going to have to come from somewhere, whether it's pasture, hay, annuals, if you have any annuals that grew, or pasture supplements. And so this is where the decisions need to be made, and you don't want to be waiting until way down the line to see what the needs are and that you're going to run out and so on. But Brad, did you have anything you want to add in here?
Oh, not on that one. Well, the one thing that comes to mind is you're determining pounds of hay we need, but you're not taking into account yet anything on storage and feeding losses. We never get 100%, so you've got to do that math as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go to the next slide, Alex. So when you're looking at purchasing feed, of course, first thing people might look to is hay, and if possible, purchase hay in your region. And I don't know if you all paid attention to the drought monitor region wide, but you know, West Virginia, parts of Virginia, a little bit of southwestern Pennsylvania, southeastern Ohio have all suffered you know, drought similar to what we are in. But there's a big chunk of Pennsylvania, parts of Virginia, Maryland, parts of Ohio, Kentucky that have not had any drought. And so within the larger region, there should be hay to buy. It may not be, you know, down the road. And so you'll have that transportation issue, but it's not like a widespread East Coast drought, which would make hay really short. So obviously, if possible, we can get it in the region. And if you think you're going to need hay, I think now's the time to be looking for it, because there'll be a lot of people looking for hay, I think, in most of our areas of the state. And so it'd be prudent to take a look now and see what you can find. Some ways you can make your hay last longer or stretch a little bit more is some other supplements, which honestly may be a better buy than hay. And so just keep in mind the note here on shelled corn. If you have high quality hay that you're feeding, shelled corn probably isn't so bad. But if you're feeding a lower quality hay, and that would be like a hay that was made in late June or on through, some people making first cutting right now because it wasn't hay they were going to make, and so they say, "Oh, hey, we're going to have something," so they're making hay, and that's not going to be a great quality, but it is something. But corn is maybe not the best supplement to go with that, because it reduces the digestibility of that protein in the hay, the low protein hay, and they just don't get as much out of what's there. So if you have that low quality hay, you might consider soy hulls or wheat bran or slew meal, distillers grain. There's different things. And you know, a forage test on your hay would be a good first step to see where we are exactly. And then your county extension agent or numerous people can give you advice on which of these supplements might be best and how much of them to feed. But those things can really help stretch the hay a lot, and again, maybe better value than spending a lot of money on hay. Go ahead. So Brad, you want to take it here?
Yep, that's a slide I stuck in there on you. When we're talking about purchasing hay, and Bruce mentioned value, we're going to see hay prices a lot higher than we're used to paying, and when we have to start paying $300 a ton for hay, there's more value in some of these alternatives. So we need to think outside the box and try to evaluate all the different sources of feed that we can purchase. And they may include corn silage or grazing corn stalks, some byproduct feeds, the commodity pellets, the lick tubs, the liquid molasses, bakery and candy waste. We've got some producers buying some of that. You can get a lot of that at a much greater value than you can purchasing hay in a lot of cases. So think about alternatives. And finally, another alternative is to move the animals. I know a few years ago, I worked with Joe Harper in Seneca Rocks to move 500 ewes out west because he didn't want to buy feed in here when we had one of the big droughts, probably late 90s. So another alternative. What's the next slide? As we start looking at these alternatives, we have to think about potential problems. Nitrate poisoning is going to be our biggest concern in this drought-stressed crops that have had nitrogen added. So corn, or anything that's fertilized heavily, we really have to be concerned about nitrate poisoning. To manage that, I'm getting a lot of questions where people want to try to evaluate nitrate while it's standing to figure out what they're going to do with it. And I think I'd go ahead and harvest it. We don't have any alternative. We have to figure out how to utilize it. So go ahead and harvest it, trying to eliminate as much nitrate as possible. So we don't want to harvest it on cloudy days. We don't want to harvest those lower parts of the corn stalk. Most of that nitrate is consolidated in the bottom 6 inches, 6 to 8 inches of stalk. So if we raise cutter heads up a little bit as we're chopping corn, we can greatly decrease that problem. Test kits are available that you can do some tests on the farm. I'm not sure how accurate they are, and I think we need to test the feed right before we feed it anyhow. So I'm advising folks to just do everything they can to reduce the nitrate poisoning potential. And then when we do those tests, we can figure out how to dilute those feedstuffs with hay or other supplements to not cause a problem. We need to remember the ensiling process will get rid of roughly half, 40 to 60% of the nitrate that's there. So if we let it ensile properly, we'll greatly reduce that problem or potential for a problem.
Hey, Brad, since those nitrates are concentrated in that lower stalk, any thoughts or idea on how high you'd have to chop to avoid the biggest part of those nitrates?
Of course, we're wanting to get as much as we can.
Right.
But if we raise that cutter bar up 6 inches, or get it 6 inches from where we normally cut, or get it above that 8-10 inch mark, it will certainly help.
Yeah. Okay.
Not harvesting right after a rain. Let it go for a few days or a week after it does rain will greatly reduce that problem as well. We have a lot of corn and row crops here in the valley that are going to be utilized for silage because the yield isn't going to be there. So there's some information there. There's a couple good websites about pricing drought-stressed corn. We have a lot being harvested right now, and I'm passing many trucks and tractors delivering silage to other farmers as they're chopping it. So we have people buying it. If you're looking at silage, it's something you got to get on right away. As far as the byproduct feeds, it's important to test all those feeds. Those byproducts have had something removed, so they are going to be lacking in something. Most all of those byproducts are very variable in the nutrients that they have. So you can't go by book values. You really need to have a test on the load that you get to be able to balance a ration. So that becomes critical as well. If it rains, we're going to get grass to grow again. Bruce already mentioned if we've overgrazed, we've depleted the energy reserves, but we need to keep those animals confined and let that grass build up some reserves, some energy reserves prior to grazing. So when we get some rain, hopefully this weekend, you don't want to be turning animals out right away. Bruce mentioned if we've overgrazed pretty close, we're not going to see much growth. because we've already depleted all those root reserves and killed off a lot of the roots. And that's even going to affect green up next spring. As we start planning for how much hay we need this winter, if we've grazed things down that close this fall, it's going to be slower starting next spring, and we're going to have to feed longer through the winter and into spring before we can turn out on the pastures again. So we need to think about that. I wanted to talk a little bit about factors affecting plant growth, and we can divide those into the environmental components that we can control and those we can't control. I want you to think about some of those things. And Bruce, I'll put you on the spot. What are some of those factors? Like,
You mean that we can control?
that we can and can't control both.
Oh, just some of the factors in general, you mean?
Yes.
Well, obviously, the first one that come to mind would be rainfall.
Rainfall,
We're
definitely.
not an irrigated area, so that'd be number one, right? That's why we're here tonight.
Yep. Yep. I'm thinking solar radiation, air temperature. A lot of the drought problems we're having are because of the heat that we've had for an extended period of time here in the South Branch Valley. We've had more 100-degree days than normal by far. Some other things include soil fertility. That's something we certainly can control. We mentioned rainfall, we can't control. But what about available soil moisture? Can we control that or not?
Yeah, how much of that water that we get are we keeping?
Exactly. And that's what I want to focus on. That is something we can control. The other thing that's critical, and we mentioned, if we're grazing everything off that we have and have it real short, that defoliation intensity, how tight we've grazed it down, is going to affect that plant growth. So those things we can't control include, we already mentioned, solar radiation, air temperature, rainfall, soil rooting depth, soil structure, texture, soil texture. The ones that we can control include soil fertility, our soil health, and that's something that is becoming the buzzword, the thing that everybody's looking at. Plant available water, or the soil water holding capacity, we can somewhat control by having enough forage covering and protecting that soil to get good water infiltration. And then the soil organic matter will help hold that water, so the water holding capacity is much higher. Compaction and bulk density, there are things that are a little bit harder for us to control, but we certainly influence them, and we need to think about them. Our forage species and varieties are another thing that we can control, and our harvest management. The timing and intensity of our grazing is key, and that's what we've got to do a better job in managing. Put that all in context with plant genetics, and we think about, we need to grow crops that fit our environment. They tolerate the drainage, wet areas, surface and subsurface drainage, moisture stress, heat and cold. We need to think a little bit more broadly about cool season plants, the C3 plants, and the warm season plants, C4 plants, and their tolerance to mineral deficiency. So our legumes are important, our grasses are important, and our forbs become very important because they uptake minerals much better and provide those minerals to our livestock. So we need to have a good mix. And all too often, we have a monoculture of one species. The key, or one of the main principles looking at soil health now, is the importance of diversity. And we need to do a better job of encouraging more of that diversity. Dr. Rayburn has done a lot of work on modeling forage growth over the years. Dr. Rayburn was our forage specialist here at WVU for many years, who retired a few years ago, but he did a lot of work that we can model forage growth, and came up with the predicted plant growth for C3 plants according to the county or area across the state. And the one thing that has always struck me when he presented this many years ago, if we look at in Grant County, the measurement is taken at Baird, so the elevation is much higher. We'll look at Hardy County. In Moorfield, that elevation is more typical of the Petersburg area and most of Grant County. Our cool season plants only have a relative dry matter yield of 62% because of the heat and the rainfall that we receive normally. We're more used to dealing with droughts than the western side of the state because of the rain shadow effect of the Allegheny Mountain Range. But if our cool season plants, we can only expect 62% relative dry matter yield, we need to really be focusing on and looking at some C4 plants, those warm season plants that do better through the heat of the summer. And there's very little of that being done in the South Branch Valley, which is, I think, is a huge mistake we're missing out on. The one place where the relative dry matter yield in West Virginia is 100% doesn't show on this because I ran out of room, but that's Pocahontas County, Snowshoe Mountain area, where the elevation's high enough, they get 100% of the relative dry matter yield. The 2.5 ASW on there is the soil water holding capacity. Available soil water is what that stands for. So when we start planning for the next drought, Bruce, you want to take this?
Yeah, so the thing, as I started out this thing tonight, was saying that there's only so many things you can do, is because drought planning doesn't happen when we have a drought. Drought planning really needs to happen way before the drought. And so that would be trying to do things like as if you know the drought's coming, and if it doesn't come, well, then there's you've got other benefits. You know, Brad mentioned we usually have more rainfall in the western part of the state, or at least in the central part of West Virginia, than I think you all do in the South Branch Valley. I don't think we've had a drought in our area as extreme as this year since, I don't remember the year. It seems like it was about 1999 or something. You know, we've had a few other dry spells, but not a severe drought like this in our area. Now, I know you all had a drought just last year. And so, you know, and I think the western part of the state, Ohio Valley, maybe, and my perception is that they tend to get a little drier quicker than we do in the central part of the state. So for sure, if you're in those areas, you need to be planning for drought. And if you're in an area where you don't have a drought very often, if you still plan for it, then you'll see some benefits from it, which I hope you'll see here when we get this done. So one thing would be the stocking rate, and we're going to go into more detail here in a minute, but You got to have the cattle stocked appropriate for what you have out there, what grass you're going to have. And then pasture divisions of some sort and rotations, rest periods. Rest periods are just huge, because if you don't give your pasture rest periods, then the roots never have a chance to really grow down. And when those roots can go deep, they can pull water from deeper, and that helps you when you come to a drought. And so how do you get a rest period? You have to have divisions. And so that's the difference between a continuously grazed pasture, which is listed there at the bottom, where you tend to have more soil exposed because the grass is shorter, so it dries out faster when we have these hot 90 degrees days that we've been having. And you have shallow root systems because those plants that are continuously eaten off never have a chance to put those roots down, and so therefore they can't respond to dry weather. And then when they're rotated, or you have rest periods built into that system, then you tend to have more shade on the soil surface, so that retains more moisture, and then you have deeper root systems that can go down and get some of that water. And that's kind of what Brad was talking about a little bit when he said, you know, one thing we can't control is how much that water that we actually utilize. So go ahead to the next one. And we're just going to talk a little bit about some grazing principles, because again, there's only so much you can do right now. But right now is the time that you want to be thinking about what you can do to avoid this problem in the future. And so, looking at number one principle here is provide adequate recovery period for plants after grazing. So that's that rest period I was talking about. And what we would call overgrazing is when an animal bites a plant before it has recovered from that previous grazing event. So it gets grazed, and then it starts to grow, and it gets grazed again. And so it has no rest period.
One key thing to add in there, Bruce, is every set stock pasture has areas that are overgrazed. They also have areas that are undergrazed.
Yes. And depending on the rotation, even some rotations will have overgrazed areas because the stocking rate or the stocking density doesn't really match the forages out there, and so they'll, or maybe where the water is, or there's different reasons. But yeah, overgrazing can happen in lots of places, but the key is to recognize that you do need a rest period or recovery period after grazing, and they need that time to build those energy reserves and again to send those roots down. And I do lots of programs around the state on weed control, and talk a lot about herbicides. And one of the things that I tell people and that try to convey to people is that we are our own worst enemy sometimes on these weeds, is because some of our management practices, like overgrazing, actually lead to more weeds. And then you can spray and kill those weeds, but they will be back because they're there for a reason. They're there because your management, basically that was best suited for them to grow there. So, you know, we continuously graze all of our forage species, and that allows those weeds no competition, and they just continue to flourish. So again, that rest period can help with weed control. And so how much rest period? That's going to vary depending on the time of year. And like in the spring, you know, you're going to move through these divisions fairly quickly and have very short rest periods because the forage is growing fast. And then usually as we get into the drier, hotter part of the year and forage growth slows down, then we have to slow down our rotation and provide more rest or recovery time. So anyway, principle number one, adequate recovery or rest for plants. Go ahead. And this is a really good illustration. If you look at that graph on the left, you have the recovery there, which is the slow, moderate, and rapid, and you have the grazing intensity, which is the light, moderate, and severe. So if you graze light, you're going to have rapid recovery. If you graze severe, it's going to be a slow recovery, and it just is. And part of the reason for that is the illustration on the right that shows the root development that you have or you can get if you allow some rest period. And also you have some top growth there which is your solar collector to collect that energy. And so I think that illustration you can see, and this is a drawing, but there's been lots of research that has shown this what's in this illustration, how these roots go down. And I think it's pretty clear you can see how those plants on the left are going to respond to drier weather than the ones on the right. So our second principle is short graze periods. And so if we talk about needing a recovery time or rest period, then that means that we have to get in there and graze it and then get out. And so about 3 days is when those plants are going to start growing again. And if you're in there longer than 3 days, then some of those plants are going to be grazed off in that time that they're trying to regrow. Not saying everybody have to have your rotation for 3 days. I'm just saying that's a thing to understand, that that's what's going on. And so if you're rotating and going a week, 10 days, then those same plants in a lot of cases are going to be eaten down a couple times. And that's kind of why in some rotations, including some of my own, you see some areas of a field where you're rotating through, and you see areas that are grazed down really close, and other areas that doesn't look like they grazed at all. It's because it didn't match up very good the time they were in there and the number of head they were in there and so on, the density, and they had choice, and they choose to regraze those little sprouts as they came back up rather than go into the other areas. So short graze periods will avoid that. So principle number 3 is matching your stocking rate to your carrying capacity. And so this is a lot of this is looking at has to do with everything you're doing, in terms of your lambing or your calving, and when you're doing those things and when your animal's nutritional needs are. And if we look at we know that when animals have, when they calve or lamb, that their nutritional needs go up significantly. And so therefore, if we're doing that at a time when we're on stored feed that is maybe not as high quality, then that means we're having to supplement those animals to keep them in good body condition, and that gets to be very expensive. And so ideally we would match that stocking rate or that cycle of whatever we're trying to do to when we have the high quality forages that can most likely or better support those animals. Because with cattle, and it'd be the same with sheep, but with cattle, the time that they need to be in good body condition, of course they need to be in good body condition when you go to breed them, because that's when they're most likely going to cycle. But the time that you really need them in good body condition is when they calve, because their nutritional needs are going to go up. And if you don't have them in good body condition when they calve, you're not going to get them in good body condition. And maybe possibly at a very high cost of feed, but probably not even then. And so that's important to match that carrying capacity to the forages you have and the quality that you need when you need it. So I don't know, Brad, did you have anything else you want to say on this one?
The only thing I'll say is we really need, if we're trying to utilize forages to extend the grazing season, we need to be understocked a little bit for our maximum spring growth. We need to be stocked at a rate when our forages slow down, or through the winter months if we're trying to graze year round. So our stocking rate needs to be a little lower than the carrying capacity, and we can figure out the carrying capacity. You can get help through NRCS, the technical support that they provide, figuring carrying capacities on the different soil types.
In short, if you an easy way to evaluate this for yourself is in late May and early June. If your grass is already short, then you're overstocked, because that's the time you should have excess grass, unless you've built in like a disposable herd or something that you can sell off. You should have excess grass at that time, because the grass growth or the forage growth in general is so much higher in that early spring period. And that's one of our challenges, grazing managers, is to try and manage that extra growth. And how do we manage that and keep the quality up for our herd? But Brad is absolutely spot on. You gotta have some excess there, because if you're matched to that rate, then you're going to be in big trouble, even in a normal year when it comes to dry, later in the hotter part of the summer when forage growth slows down. All right, go ahead. So stock density is different than stocking rate. So if you're not familiar with these terms, stock density is the number of animals on an acre at a given point in time. So as opposed to stocking rate, which would be the total number of animals on the total boundary. And so what the density does is it allows you to to get those animals to go in there and eat everything that's there. Well, not everything, but eat more uniformly and not pick and choose so much. I mean, it's kind of what rotational grazing does to start with. It forces them to eat things that they might otherwise leave, and doesn't allow them to pick and choose as much. So you put a large number of animals on a smaller area for a shorter time, and they eat it more uniformly. It helps a great deal with weed control. A lot of weeds can be controlled that way, either by eating them or by trampling them. And so you get that uniformity, and then you also have since you're there for a short period of time, you end up with a long rest period for that small area, and so you can really get some good forage growth. And so it really is critical that you think about if you already have rotation and you're getting uneven grazing, then try and do some things to increase the stock density.
It's going to help decrease the variation in maturity, as you have listed there last. But I want to stress one thing: stock density is pounds of animal per acre. So rather than stocking rate, where we're looking at number of head that we can run on a given paddock, stock density is what we need to focus on, the pounds of animal that we can put on an acre. And those numbers, when we start looking at mob grazing, management intensive grazing, or mob grazing, or this adaptive grazing management, that's key to getting some of the results we want from managing our grasses.
Okay, so the next thing would be the fifth principle would be to use the largest herd possible, consistent with good animal husbandry. So what that means is when possible, put your cattle together into one big herd. And so this helps with that animal impact you can do with this larger herd. And so the biggest problem with most of us doing that is a breeding herd. And so some people would want, well, in our part of the state, actually, in central West Virginia, it can be harder to put these smaller breeding herds together anyway, because a lot of our boundaries are not big enough to support a large herd. And so you have, and they're not contiguous, so you can't put them in this one and then rotate to the next one easily. And so breeding season might be a time when when you do have groups separated. But if you have the ability to combine these herds, and if you have a commercial herd, you can run multiple bulls in a herd. You don't have to have 30, 40 cows here and 30, 40 cows here with separate bulls. So consider that putting these groups together. Definitely after breeding season, you can put these herds together, and of course, you think about the other benefits of that. It's less different herds to check mineral, to check water, to check everything, and so you're dealing with one herd, and you can then get that stocking density even on larger pastures, because you have more animals you can put in at one time. And so that this point just kind of helps you achieve that, some of the previous things that we talked about. The other thing, if you see that the last thing, they're trailing the water, if you have that trail, that path where they're going to water, then that tells you that your density and things are a little bit out of sync because they're all moving to water at the same time instead of just kind of going to water separately, which would eliminate that trailing to water deal.
As we move into water, Bruce led right into it. Water's the simplest yet most essential nutrient for livestock health and productivity. We can certainly make improvements with our grazing management by doing some water developments. We need to think about water intake requirements, and as we're dealing with this drought, for those that are having to haul water, it becomes critical. We need to think about those animals all going to drink at one time, the normal behavior, the herd behavior, making sure that we have enough water that the calves can reach in those troughs. So cattle are going to drink 8 to 15% of their body weight in water weight, or that's about equivalent to 2 gallons per 100 pounds live weight. The preliminary function of that is dry matter intake and temperature. So as we hit these 100-degree days, it becomes critical that we're providing enough water, and we're providing it in such a fact the calves don't get pushed out and they can meet all of their water requirements. There's lots of different charts out there that you can look up how many gallons of water is needed for various temperatures. They vary a good bit, so they're a good starting point to give you an idea. When we start talking about water development, we need to think about the recovery rate of the trough. Make sure that those animals can all drink and provide enough water so that we don't have animals trailing very far to water and all going to water at once.
Hey, Brad.
Yep.
I would jump in there too. The other thing, and we're hearing some of this now, is that there's a behavior function that comes into play with a lot of this too. And it's calves, but it's also younger cows, those cows in the back of the pecking order. And as those trailing distances get to be excessive, a lot of people are starting to tell us anecdotally that, and we've seen this too in research settings where calves will leave without ever getting an opportunity to drink. And so particularly for those that are hauling water, the ability to scatter out at different places to provide that water access in more smaller tubs for that depth thing, one, but also the ability to scatter that water out to interrupt that dominant behavior a little bit in that herd, or the herd mentality of these animals will benefit you greatly. And so I think the other thing too, when we're talking that where we see that same behavior phenomenon is with cows and hay rings and hay feeders. And so this is a time when, if you're going to, especially if you're limit feeding some hay and when you're watering, it's time to really think about extra access, whether that's linear inches of bunk space or surface area to water. Those are all vital things that we need to keep in mind as we're hauling water, hauling feed, and because of this behavior interaction that plays over into this dominant impact of those old boss cows can cause you a lot of problems. And as the season wears and we're continuing not to get rain and we're seeing the drought grow, we're going to see more and more health issues that are going to start to crop up that are going to be related to these dehydration and inability to have an opportunity to eat functions of this animal behavior interaction.
Exactly. One thing, I worked with a producer a couple weeks ago that was having some of those same issues. And we talked about, I don't know if he's implemented it for sure or not, but we've talked about and encouraged him to set up a creek gate with a water trough in it to make sure the calves could get to it.
And it's probably not a bad idea for those of you, and I know we've got a few that are fall calving, to think about as you get further into winter, some creek feeding access, or if you start to see a little bit of grass come back, some creek grazing access as well, especially on those young calves. And that, it's probably gonna have to be built just a little more sturdy than normal. But I think that's an excellent idea.
So as we talk about water systems, they can be fairly simple. Some of what Jerry's referring to is some of the lower water troughs, or possibly some of these lick tubs, plastic tubs set out in the field. If you set a whole row of them out there, so those dominant cows don't end up pushing out everything else, and everything has access to it. As we get into water development, the fountains, automatic water fountains in the pastures have been more popular lately, but there's certainly some alternatives, such as the tire troughs. Our preliminary factors limiting our grazing practices is water. If we can develop more water sites, we can better utilize most of our pastures and provide more rest and have more growth from our forages.
Brad, that ROI, return on investment.
Yes.
It definitely pays to add water. And anybody that's hauling water right now, and I'm not saying that you can always avoid that, but I have people in my area that haul water even in semi good years. And if you're hauling water in those kind of years, then in a year like this, you're gonna be hauling water all summer, which some of them are, and that gets old real fast. And so investment in some water, every farm is different on how that looks as far as which way to go, but it will definitely pay in pasture management and in future dry weather.
And I would say even hauling water can pay and help with our nutrient distribution and animal performance, rather than setting the troughs at the easiest spot to fill them, put them where we need them in the pasture to distribute nutrients and utilize those forages. We can increase the pasture health and productivity from where we can supply that water. There's just some areas up on top of the hill that are really hard to get permanent water development to. The impact of our water sites, of course, we're going to have plants utilized closer to water and shade. We're going to have nutrient distribution, manure pats distribution on those paddocks around those areas as well. And those areas furthest away from the water or shade are going to be more mature. We're going to have more problems getting the animals to utilize those plants the forage when we need them to. So water development is key. And then, as Bruce mentioned, a lot of our weed problems we cause ourselves. Until we change our management, we're going to continue to have those same weed problems, whether we utilize a herbicide or not. They're going to come back. Water quality is another key thing. The couple concerns, the main thing I want to point out from this chart is just that ponds are normally lower quality water. We can have some problems if we let cattle have access to water and they're standing in the pond all day. We can control some of that with some fly control, providing shade, trying to keep them out of it, but they're still going to go to those ponds and we're going to have water quality issues. The big things are the nitrates. Nitrates not only build up in the forage, we also have problems with the water, sulfates, and then in this heat, we've had some problems with blue-green algae, which is toxic. We've got to be concerned with that. Water, as we talk about water development and or placing water troughs, water can put our animals where we need them. Just like mineral placement becomes key. We can encourage animals to the areas of the paddocks that we need without fencing them in there, simply by providing those things. When we start looking at paddock layout, water needs to be within 800 feet of the livestock. That's going to limit the trailing to water. And those trails up and down these hills, that bare soil, were eventually causing some erosion problems. So water becomes key in helping us manage not only the forage, but manage to keep our soil. We can improve the utilization of our forages. This graph just shows the distance from water, how far away, and the percent utilization of those forages, and it decreases the further away we get. And this shows manure distribution. Cow piles in relation to water and or shade. The nutrients, and one thing I didn't look up those numbers, Bruce, maybe you have them in the top of your head. The nutrients that goes through a cow in a year are significant. And if we can manage them such that we're getting those nutrients where they need to be instead of in the shade, in the trees, or right next to the water, we can really improve our productivity of our pastures. Do you have any of those figures on top of your head, Bruce?
I don't. No, I don't.
In summary, for the water part, access to plenty of clean water at all times is critical. There's no one solution. The return on investment pays in the long run. And it's something we don't have to do all at once. You don't have to have all your water development done to be able to use a pasture. We can improve the utilization of it if we continue to develop different watering sites.
And Brad, I would add to, I think one of the speakers last week said this, I don't remember who it was, that when you're thinking about your options, you know, there's wells or maybe municipal water or springs. If you could go out there right now and find a spring, then that's going to be a pretty good water source to possibly develop. And so this would be a good time to scout while it's really dry like this. And I myself actually have a couple of places on my own place that I have some water. One of them actually is had a trough float before and it needs redone, but there is water there for sure. And so that's one thing in looking at your plan. You may not do it right now, but at least you can see where that site is, because you can find water everywhere in the spring. But how about when it's really dry like this?
We've on our full hour. One thing we didn't cover that I'm getting some questions on now, of course, we have some people interested in seed varieties, recommendations, and seeding rates and some of those kind of things. Until it rains, there's not a whole lot of use. We're getting late in the year. Of course, there's some opportunities for some cereal grains, some cool season grasses to be planted. We could still get some benefits yet this fall, probably if somebody's trying to get something in that'll produce something yet this fall. Oats is probably the best thing to look at. If we're trying to have some dry matter, some energy next spring, triticale, the rye, and any of the small grains are certainly worth looking at. We need to do a better job of utilizing some cool season plants and some warm season plants in our pasture rotation and planning for the future. With that, I think we'll open it up for questions. Bruce, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, one more thing before we go for questions. I just want to tie this back together. If you take the steps with your pasture management and your grazing, and then with water developments to plan for a drought. So you knew this drought was coming and you planned for it, and then the drought doesn't come. Okay, so you've done all this stuff and the drought doesn't come. Then what do you have? Well, you have water where you can better manage your pasture, so that's a plus, and you're going to have a lot more grass. So possibly if you could buy some stockers for the fall, or you just stockpile that grass and you can graze way farther into the fall, possibly into the winter, save a lot of hay costs, and so there's not a downside to stocking and planning for a drought and then have it not happen.
We should be shooting for at least 300 days of grazing instead of providing feed. Those cows are creatures of habit. Once we give them a bale, they're standing there at the gate waiting for the next one. They can graze through more snow and weather than you think. And the quality of that standing forage is so much better than the hay we're providing in most cases. We can certainly be more efficient and more profitable by grazing longer. This year, we're going to be lucky for a lot of our producers to not have it to be feeding 300 days. Do you see any questions in the chat box, or anybody want to unmute themselves and ask? Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah. Sounds like JJ.
Yeah, I seem to think that I know that people don't like to see hungry cows, but I started feeding mine they always say to start with your poorest quality hay first, and I wait till they get it all cleaned up. Sometimes they get towards the bottom end there, they don't want to clean it up that well, but I think if you try to keep hay in front of them all the time, they waste more. And from my understanding, hay prices are becoming high rather quickly, at least in our area.
Yes.
How do our producers not waste as much of their hay? They look at purchasing some of those expensive round bale feeders. I can't think the name of them. They don't waste as much hay.
Well, that's one thing you could do, JJ. But you are absolutely right. Is one of the things that round bales have done for us is in general is we tend to have hay in front of our cows all the time, and they tend to overeat way more dry matter than what they really need. And so one way that if you have the ability to do this would be to unroll just whatever group you're feeding can eat in a day or two's period of time, so that they can't just stand there and eat. And so, of course, when we're in this drought, you have plenty of places that are dry that you can unroll on, and that might be one strategy.
I've worked with some producers in the past to try to spread their hay supply out where they let cattle into the hay bale in a lot for a given period of time, a few hours, and then kick them back out and shut them out. You can extend that way and provide their needs. You just got to really keep an eye on body condition, make sure you're providing the needs of those animals. The other comment I want to make, we hear it a lot, but we're really not wasting hay. We're providing benefits to those soil microorganisms. We're providing organic matter. We're providing nutrients. If we're feeding it in the right spot, we're not wasting that. We're getting benefits from it. When hay is expensive, that's probably not the time to provide a lot of that. But the bale grazing is another option. Set your bales out with electric fence between them so that you can restrict the amount they have and move fence when they clean that up enough is certainly another option to managing that. And if you do that in an area that needs nutrients, we need to focus on improving soil health characteristics, increase the dry matter, sequester more carbon. That bale grazing works very well.
Yeah, Brad, I was reading some of the, that's a really good point. I don't know where they were doing the research at, but they were seeing actually how long they could let the cows into an area that they would eat enough of their, basically to fill the room in. I think it was like 4 to 8 hours or something. They only needed so many hours access, and then they took them back out, and the animals still ate about the same amount, whether they had access all the time or whether they only had like 6 or 8 hours access. It's kind of interesting.
You're on mute. Now talk.
Alex is trying to pull up, had me muted there, sorry, the video of some bale grazing work that we're doing here in Hardy and Grant County. While she's doing that, if anyone else has any questions or comments, please jump in here.
Yeah, I think, and you talk about bale grazing and the concept of limiting access to feed is one that is another very excellent management strategy to make sure that we're letting cattle effectively utilize and efficiently utilize our hay resources. And but that's one of those deals if you're going to do that, that's one of those places where it's critical that you have enough opportunity for everything to eat during that time frame. That's the one caveat to that is, a lot of guys don't necessarily have a space for every cow to eat all the time when we're feeding ad lib. But if you're going to limit feed or limit access feed, hay, then you got to make sure you got enough room.
I'm not sure which video this is, but I'll.
Bale grazing can be done through the winter months. The one problem that we have or concern with it is dealing with the mud and tearing up our pastures. But certainly this time of year, if you're having to supplement some forage, bale grazing may be the key for you. This just shows where bales were set out. They were actually the road to the left of the trees, and then there was a road to the right of the trees over more along the fence that those cows had access to. And they cleaned them up really well, did better than I expected with less mud and problems than I expected last winter.
Stefan's on. Stefan is on.
Stefan's on there. This is at Stefan Craman's. Do you have any comments you want to make, Stefan?
Was on anyways.
Um, yeah, I can make a comment to that. So first of all, it was drier, at least up on that hillside, than in most years last winter. But it worked very well for me. It was actually very good to see the how good the manure was distributed. That was for me the big key to take away. When you scatter the hay out, that the manure gets scattered out too. Of course, that won't be as great in the summertime when the cows are more heading to shade or water, uh, especially if you have a water source when they can where they can stand in. But in the wintertime, it worked very well. I will definitely consider doing that again. So um, that's kind of where I am, and thank you, everybody, for these great meetings. Thanks.
Thank you for your input and comments. Other questions or comments before we wrap this up?
So next week, we will have a larger focus on animal management, some animal health topics. We're going to get a little deeper into some other strategies, thinking about long-term changes to your operation, address a little bit of cow efficiency and cow maintenance. And we're going to have some discussion about animal health, unique animal health challenges that this drought's probably going to cause us now and in the future. And then the big teaser is for the last one of these sessions, we're going to have a focus on risk management and financial considerations. I think Bruce mentioned earlier that not very far from here is not a drought. And we are experiencing some record gross income in the industry. Gross income doesn't equal net profit, but we're looking at record high calf prices, record low cow numbers. All the metrics look good. And so what we've been able to accomplish is we're going to have Dr. Darrell Peel from Oklahoma State University, ag economist, come on and give us an outlook, preview, a little bit of advice on risk management. We'll have some other folks in that same risk management discussion, and week after next. Next week, we'll continue this discussion, focus more on the animal, focus more on the health. Then we'll wrap up with some risk management. And in the interim time, everyone remember that these are stressful times, and Alex will let you in with your thoughts about where we need to be on that. And thanks again.
Thank you, Jerry. Yep. So just like I've been telling you guys all week or all series, make sure you check on your neighbors. And Jerry reminded me about this meme. Everybody can see my screen still, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That, you know, we all might handle all of this differently. So if you feel like maybe someone in your family or a friend is overreacting or being more stressed out or whatever you want to think, just remember people handle things differently, and to be considerate of your neighbors and just keep checking on them. And that's all I'm going to say on that tonight. So thank you all for joining us. We have, like Jerry was mentioning, the next two meetings dates are September 5th and September 12th at 7 p.m. And then here, which is also in the chat box, is some links to your local NRCS, Conservation Agency, FSA offices, where you can click on those links and find your local numbers. And then the bottom link is the YouTube channel where these videos from these recordings from these meetings will be housed. So, and also,
And we have field day September 7th, 1 o'clock at Rainbow Farm.
yes, and I was gonna try to pull that up, but I probably won't be able to find it in time. But if you are interested in coming to that, just email me or call my office. Jerry, do you want to give a quick overview on it real fast?
Yeah, sure. So we're gonna have a focus on fencing. There, we're gonna spend some time doing some hands-on demonstrations. We have the efficient fencer inventor from Lewisburg, West Virginia, is going to come up, demonstrate his machine. We're going to have some impact post driving demonstrations. We're going to have a discussion about energizers, ground faults and grounding, the 3 plagues of electric fences. We're also going to have a brief discussion about the legalities of fencing and so do some code review for Fencing West Virginia. Our keynote speaker will be Amanda Radke. She's an advocate, wonderful, wonderful speaker. She's going to share a very positive and uplifting message about agriculture and our legacy and our future. So we invite everybody to come. Please RSVP to the Extension office or see one, Alex or I, let us know you're coming. And program will be start at 1 o'clock at the farm here at Rainmore Farm, Wardensville. And we'll wrap up with supper at 6 o'clock.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. All
Hey,
right.
Alex.
Yes.
Hey, it's Robert. I would just encourage people to get on to the Drought Monitor, and down there is a report that people can do, a Seymour report. That way the Drought Monitor is getting more of a grasp of what's actually going on in our area. Like I said, I sent you that QR code today. If you want to hand that around to people, that would be great, because
throw that in the chat box real fast.
The more reports we get, the better off it's going to be for not only pretty much everybody across the state, because I think they're really missing the boat. But that's where I'll leave that.
The other thing, I'd encourage everyone to continue to reach out to all the agency partners at the local, state, and federal level. Robert, I hope you guys are busy. We continue to encourage people to try to call your local office and get an appointment, please, to go see these folks. But please reach out to the folks at the Conservation Agency, the Department of Ag, at NRCS, at the FSA, and with your local lenders.
My attachment is opening. It's being a little slow, and I'll throw that in the chat box. All right, so here is the QR code that you can scan, and it'll take you to that survey.
And I encourage everybody to, I know it just came out today. They will look at those again for like the coming week up till I think it's Tuesday at lunchtime. So, and that asks for, you can upload pictures, and then you put a little description of so they have a better understanding of what's going on in the picture. So I encourage everyone to do so. I think it would be it's a useful tool for them, and we've getting compliments of the reports of people putting them in. So I think we ought to flood them out. So do it.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for those comments. And are there any more questions or comments?
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
I have a couple of the hay feeders, the high dollar or the expensive ones that I think JJ mentioned earlier.
Yep.
I love them. They are expensive. You're going to put a chunk of money out front, but at a time like right now where hay is getting, $60, $70 a bale, if the amount of money you're going to save, and they're not a 1 year investment, they're going to last you for several years, but the money you're going to save in the long run is they will pay for themselves. I've got 2 of them sitting over in my lot right now, and I paid a chunk of money for them, but I probably put 70 or 80 round bells to them, and there's probably less than a entire round bell in the bottom of both of them, because I haven't picked them up to clean underneath them because they're sitting on concrete. But the amount of hay, say, loss or waste, it's amazing at what they actually save.
We mentioned return on investments, and I sure appreciate your comments. Those kinds of things, the round bale feeders to limit the waste or the loss, and the storage loss. Anytime we can do a better job storing our bales under cover, we can certainly get a return on our investment.
All right. Well, if there's no more comments, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And I hope to see you again next week on Thursday at 7 o'clock. There'll be the same Zoom link as you used tonight. And have a great rest of your evening. And I hope you get some rain.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.